Hey everybody, Kevin P. McAuliffe here, and I am one of the senior editors at MyJo in Toronto, and I am back again with another brand new Digital Juice tutorial. This time we're going to be taking a look at getting started with Digital Juice fonts Part 2. Now, before we get into the tutorial, there are a few housekeeping things that I do need to take care of first. First of all, I do want to remind everyone that, as I always do at the start of all my tutorials, if you're going to follow along, make sure you download the most recent version of the Juicer. And as of this recording, the most recent version of the Juicer is version 3.67 build 203. It's a free download for Mac, for Windows, and for Mac Snow Leopard users. So head on over to the Digital Juice website, head to the Juicer section, and download it. It is absolutely free. Now, the next thing that I do want to remind you of is that, again, this is part 2 of my Getting Started with Digital Juice Fonts tutorials. So I want to make sure that if you didn't watch part 1, definitely check it out, because we're going to be talking about a few advanced things in this tutorial, and we're going to be skipping over a lot of the stuff that we talked about in part 1. Okay, the one last thing that I do want to remind you of is that Digital Juice wants your feedback. And you know what? I like your feedback as well, because it's the only way that I can make better tutorials for you, the viewers. So please put your comments in. By putting your comments in, not only does it help me and Digital Juice get an idea of what you guys want to see, but you're also entered to win whatever contest Digital Juice happens to be running at the time. So again, it only takes you a minute. Enter a comment, helps me, helps Digital Juice, gives you a chance to win something. Hey, how can you go wrong with that? Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide Firefox, and let's Command Tab into our favorite application for Digital Juice products, the Juicer. And I'm just going to get us back to where we were at the end of Digital Juice Fonts Part 1. So I'm just going to come down to Digital Juice Fonts, and I'm just going to select a font. Why don't I select Circuit Board? And I'm going to double click on Standard DJ Fonts, and I'll pick one here. How about Midnight Connection? Now again, if I'm going along too quickly, go back and refresh yourself by watching Getting Started with Digital Juice Fonts Part 1. Okay, so now I'm going to click on the Settings button, and we're just going to lay out our canvas here. So I'm going to come to Edit Layout, and we'll make this 1280 by 720. And once we have it there, I'm just going to reset my bounding box. We'll double click on our font, and I'm just going to call this DJ Fonts 2. And we'll just select it all. We're going to center it up here, and let's just adjust the baseline to bring it right down into the middle. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the bottom, because I want to show you exactly what's going on with this font. So I'm going to come down to my black background, and I'm going to set it to be transparent. There we go. So this gives us a really good idea of what this font is going to look like over a transparent background. Now we're basically going to be looking at 3 things in this tutorial. One, I'm going to show you how you can get in and edit these fonts. Secondly, and probably most importantly, I'm going to show you how to export them out of the Juicer. And third, I'm going to show you how you can use these fonts in applications like Adobe's After Effects and really create some cool animated versions of Digital Juice fonts. That's right, animated versions of Digital Juice fonts. Okay, so let's start by editing this font. I want to add a little bit of flair to this font to make it different from the standard Midnight Connection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate up here to the Edit Font tab, and you'll see here that right away we can see that we have 5 layers that go into making up this one Digital Juice font. And what I'm going to do is just zoom in a bit here just so we can see exactly what's going on. And I'm going to turn off all the layers here quickly. Okay, so the first layer that goes into making our font is obviously just a black background. Next, we have one layer of circuitry that goes in, and you can see that it's a bit of a gray color. So what the team at Digital Juice has done is they've doubled up on it to make it stand out a little bit more from the black background. Next, they've added some diodes, and you can see that when I click on it, the diodes are these short little lines in here. And last but not least, they've added a very slight outline stroke that you can see right here. It's very faint, but it helps just take the font that much further. Now in this case, if there was any of these elements that I didn't like, I could simply come up and I could right click and say delete layer, remove it, and then save the font out as a new font. You'll see that in this drop down menu, we also have the ability to add new layers, duplicate layers, delete layers, replace the layer type, look at the layer properties, rename the layer, or copy and paste layer effects or clear them. But in this case, I don't want to delete anything. What I want to do is I want to add to this font. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the top shaded base layer, and I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to say duplicate layers. And you can see that over here we do have a shortcut, which on the Mac is Command and D, or for all you Windows users it'll be Control and D. And I'm going to duplicate this layer, and you'll notice that as soon as I do, my circuit boards get even brighter. But I'm not going to be adding circuit boards to this font at all. I'm going to add some highlights inside this font. And how we're going to do that is very simple. I'm going to come over here to the shaded base dropdown, and I want to see what goes into making this element of the font. So I'm going to drop down my little drop down here, and you can see that what has been added is a texture fill. And if you want to see what other parameters you have the ability to add to your different layers inside your font, you can simply come over here to the effects dropdown, and you can see that you can add blurs, unsharpened masks, brightness, contrast, hue, saturation, as well as a whole bunch of other different effects. The one that I like to use all the time is drop shadow. This is great for all of you users out there who don't have access to Photoshop on the machine you're working and want to add something simple like a drop shadow to your font. Very simple to do right from within the juicer. But what I want to do is I want to add a new texture to this font. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to Browse Library, and I'm simply going to come down right here to All That Glitters, and I'm going to select it, and you'll see as soon as I do, it has now added that to my font. What I'm going to do now is simply come down and say Apply, and there it is, ready to go, ready to be exported. Now you'll also see up here, and what I'm going to do is just drop this back up here for a second. You'll see that if I come down, what I'm going to do is just delete one of these shaded base layers. I'm just going to say delete layer. And I'm going to come now to shaded base, and I'm going to drop this down because I wanted to show you that you'll see that this is obviously our circuit board texture, but it has been added with a transfer mode. It's been added with a screen transfer mode, which obviously you have the ability to go in and adjust. And I'm just going to set this back to be normal, and you can see now that our circuit board does stand out pretty well, and I can take it and even adjust the opacity to really make it stand out. So you can see that it's very, very, very simple to get in and quickly adjust these fonts however you want. Now, if I'm happy with this font, what I can do is simply come down here and say Save as a new font, and I'm going to call this font Midnight Connection 2. You can see that I have the ability to leave a comment for the font. I can add some keywords to search for it. I can discard hidden layers. I can also discard unused effects. I can even right from here upload to the community fonts. Now I talked a little bit about community fonts in part 1, so if you want to know more about downloading and uploading fonts for the community to use, you can check that out in part 1. Now I'm just going to say to choose a background color. I could come in here and choose whatever background I want. If I wanted it to be white, I could have it as white, but we'll just leave it as black because it really shows the outline of my font when it's sitting over black, and I'm just going to say save. You'll see that the juicer saves my font. So there it is, ready for me to export. So let's talk about exporting a little bit. And before we do that, let's just zoom back on our layer here. Okay, so let's talk about exporting. And I'm going to come back to my Edit Layout tab, because as we talked about before, we have the canvas, which is obviously where we get in and set the size of our canvas and the resolution we want to export as. But right below that, we have our output settings. And you'll see the very first option we have is what format do we want to export this as. And the great thing is that Digital Juice has included all of the very common export formats such as PNG, JPEG, Targa, TIFF, merged PSD, bitmap, and layered PSD for us to export to. You can see that we have control over what quality do we want to export the font as. We can say where we want to send it to, and we can even auto name the font if we want to, but I like to call the font whatever I want to call it. Now, probably for me, the most important export feature in here is layered PSD. Now, what does that mean? Well, guess what that means? That means that when I export this file from the juicer and I go into Photoshop, it's going to be laid out exactly like I see it inside the juicer. So I'm going to have control over all of the individual elements that go into making up this font. So let's just come back to our Edit Layout tab, and I'm going to come down here to my layered PSD, and you can see that again I have my little wrench to click on, and I can come in here and choose how I want this font to be laid out when it's exported. So as far as the layer options go, you can see that I have the choice of each word being in a separate layer, or each character being in a separate layer, or each phrase being in a separate layer. I can even have the entire thing in one layer. This is really important when you're sending this to something like After Effects. If you want to have the ability to go in and quickly animate each character in your Digital Juice font export. You can simply say each character is in its own separate layer. That way when you get into After Effects, no masking required. But for right now, I'm just going to leave each word in its own separate layer. You can see I can categorize to the layer groups, which requires Photoshop CS2 or above. I can preserve any sublayers that I have, and I can export only the visible layers. Now, in most cases, that's what you're going to want to do, so keep that in mind when you're exporting. So I'm just going to say OK, and you'll see here that I also have control over the font scaling quality by coming to my little wrench again, and you can see that I can export as smooth. Now, when I click on smooth, watch what happens to the A. You can see not as sharp as you might want it. Crisp is the default, but in some cases you might want that to be very sharp. Now I'm going to leave it as crisp because I don't like my edges to be super sharp. So I'm just going to leave it as crisp, and I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to set this export to be going to my desktop. Now I've already exported this as a layered PSD file, but if I hadn't, all I'd have to simply do is say send this to the desktop. I can name the file whatever I want to and simply come down and say render selected. Now something that's important to keep in mind is that when you install Digital Juice fonts, you were asked how you wanted to install it, whether you wanted to do an entire install or whether you wanted to do a partial install. Now the value of doing an entire install is that you can export all of the fonts from Digital Juice fonts at any resolution you want to. If you only did the basic install like I did, you have the ability to export medium resolution fonts. But in most cases, that's what I'm working on. I'm not working on fonts for print. But for all of you people that are working in print out there, make sure you install the full install of Digital Juice fonts so you don't have to keep popping your disk back and forth in your machine to export your fonts. Okay, so like I said, I've already exported this, so I'm just going to hit Command and H to hide out of the juicer. And as you can see, if I double click on my Getting Started with Digital Juice Fonts 2 folder, you can see that I've exported the font right here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm simply going to right click on the file and I'm going to say Open with Adobe's Photoshop. Now I have Photoshop open already, and you can see there is the font. Now I know the first thing you're thinking is, well, hold on a second, why is this on black? Well, if you take a look down here at my layers, the juicer has exported the background with the font. So I can just simply delete that, and there is my font. Now I know what you're also probably thinking, well, wait a second, why does it say flat base, then it has the layers, and then it says flat base again? Well, remember, if I Command Tab back into the juicer, when I exported this file, I said that I wanted to export each word in a separate layer. So that is exactly what the juicer has done for me. It's exported, and you'll see if I turn off the flat base here, there's my DJ, and I can simply take the first layer, select it, hold Shift on the keyboard, and now come up here to my drop down and say New Group from Layers, and now I can organize this very quickly. We'll just call this DJ. And I'm just going to do the same thing here. And we'll call this font. As you can see, when I originally exported it, I didn't call it DJ Fonts 2, but that's okay for the purpose of what we're doing. And you can see now, very organized way to work in Photoshop. And again, the great thing in Photoshop is you can simply come in now. If I wanted to add a drop shadow to this layer, simply double click on it. And let's just make the drop shadow really stand out. Let's make it red just for the purpose of what we're doing here. There, you can see it there. And we could take it, adjust the distance here just like that, adjust the spread however we like. There we go, that's looking pretty good, and you can see now how you can get in and really start manipulating this in Photoshop. Now I'm not going to get too much into the manipulation in Photoshop, only because Jackie Dawson has done a whole series of tutorials specifically on working with Digital Juice font for print. So I'm going to leave it right here as far as Photoshop goes, but what I want to show you now is something really cool. And I'm just going to cancel out, we're just going to hide out of Photoshop here. And I'm going to Command Tab into Adobe's After Effects. Now, the reason that I want to show this to you in After Effects is that there's really some cool stuff that you can do with Digital Juice fonts. Now, one thing I should point out is what I showed you in Photoshop right there, that can be done in any version of Photoshop. What I'm about to show you now can also be done in any version of After Effects. I'm using CS5, but you don't need to be using CS5 to do what I'm going to show you. So let's come over here and let's right click and let's say Import and let's say File. I'm going to come up to my folder, Getting Started with Digital Juice Fonts 2, and I'm going to select my djfonts.psd, and I'm going to come down here and say Import as Composition. And I'm going to say Open. It's going to ask me what I want to do. Do I want to merge the layer styles into the footage or make them editable? I'm just going to leave them as merged layer styles into footage. And you'll see now that I have a composition here with my DJ Fonts word mark in it, exactly the way you saw it in Photoshop. I'm just going to delete the background here for 1 second. Now the reason that it's still black is because obviously black is the color of my background, but I could take a look at it on my transparency grid, and there we go. Now what I wanted to show you about working with After Effects and Digital Juice fonts is very cool. Let's sidetrack for just 1 second and let's come back to the juicer. What I'm going to do in the juicer is I'm simply just going to say cancel, because I want to point out that there are a lot of things that you can do with Digital Juice fonts if you just think a little bit outside the box. And what I mean by that is I'm going to come up to the Motion Designers Toolkit and I'm just going to select Motion Designers Toolkit number 2. And as you can see in the Motion Designers Toolkit 2, we have access to a lot of very tech-looking elements. And you can see that the very first one that we have selected is circuit boards. And I'm just going to come down here a little bit, because what I found in here was I found a tech element, and I believe it was this one right here. This is it. That looks very similar to the texture that I have in Digital Juice fonts. Now I know that you're probably already thinking about where I'm going with this. So what I did with this is that I exported this file from the juicer. Now if we want to get into talking about exporting Motion Designers Toolkit elements from the juicer, remember you can check out my tutorial on getting started with the Motion Designers Toolkit for all of the information that you're going to need to get these elements out of the juicer. But needless to say, I'm just going to hide the juicer and I'm going to come over to my folder here, because as you can see, I've already exported this file ready to be used in After Effects. What I'm going to do now is I'm simply going to take this. I'll just quit out of QuickTime. I'm going to Command Tab back in After Effects. Let's import this file by pressing Command and I on the Mac, Control and I on Windows. I'm going to select my 001101 Circuit Boards A and say Open. It's going to ask me what type of alpha channel. It's pre-multiplied. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new composition, but what I'm going to do, and we'll just make our background black again, is I'm going to make it twice as long, because I know that this element is loopable in the horizontal axis. So let's take the width and make it 2560. And what we're going to do is make sure that we anchor it over here on the left, and I'm going to say OK, and I'm just going to duplicate this layer and bring it all the way over here, just so that we can have it line up, just like that. Perfect. Now you can see that what happens is that our element comes on just like that, perfect, and comes off. And now what I can do is I can come back to my Digital Juice fonts layer, and you'll see that my shaded base, if I just zoom in by pressing Command and plus on the Mac, Control and plus on Windows, you can see that the shaded base layer is what is making my circuit boards appear. Now let me just zoom back here just 1 second, just because obviously as you can see I just turned off the circuits on my DJ, not the DJ fonts, because remember everything's divided into 2 sections. But here's where things get really cool. So as you can see, obviously I've shut off my circuit boards, and I know you can see where I'm going with this. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my circuit boards layer and I'm going to bring it down here, and I'm going to need it once, because if I zoom back here you can see that this stretches across the entire comp and out the other side. So what we're going to do is we're just going to bring it down like such. That's looking good just like that. And what I'm going to do is take my 2 flat base layers, which makes up my DJ fonts, and I'm going to duplicate them. And we're going to bring them to the top here, and then I'm going to pre-compose them together. I'm going to say OK, and now what we're going to do is we're going to simply take our circuit board, bring it down below there, and we're going to do an alpha matte of DJ fonts. And you can see now that what we have is we have an animated circuit board element that's appearing over top, and I can just bring this down here. We can bring our flat base all the way down here. And I'm just going to bring this all the way down to just above the flat base, just like that. And you can see now that if I preview this, what I have is I have an animated Digital Juice font element using Digital Juice fonts and the Motion Designers Toolkit. And you can see that in reality, for me to show it to you in After Effects took about 5 minutes, but you could easily create this in probably about 1.5 minutes on your own. So you can see that with a little bit of thought, you can take what might be a standard static Digital Juice font and really take it to the next level by combining it with the Motion Designers Toolkit. So I hope this look at Digital Juice fonts has helped you realize that it's not only a tool for graphic designers, it's also a fantastic tool for motion designers as well, because you can combine it with elements from the Motion Designers Toolkit to really make some cool looking fonts. So if you have any questions, comments, or tutorial requests, head on over and post them in the Digital Juice forums. This has been Kevin P. McAuliffe. Thanks a lot for watching.